Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Beautiful August day here, calling in from Washington State. Brian Chaplin here is the founder of Medicine Box with a mission to co-create human health and happiness while harmonizing our relationship with Mother Earth. And today's guest, Dr. Richard Lewis Miller, is a perfect person to be able to sink in with that mission. And very grateful to have Dr. Richard Lewis Miller calling in today from the Fort Bragg, Mendocino area up there in NorCal. He has been practicing psychology for the past 60 years, and his professional experience includes the health sanctuary at Wilbur Hot Springs, the founder of the health sanctuary at Wilbur Hot Springs, providing healing, prevention, and health maintenance. Co-Kender's alcohol and drug program as the founder and chief clinician of the internationally acclaimed pioneering Co-Kender's alcohol and drug program. Dr. Miller integrated his techniques of humanistic psychology and psychophysical fitness training with social model rehabilitation. During the 80s, he detoxified over 1,500 persons at Wilbur Hot Springs. Dr. Miller states that the professionally designed Wilbur ambiance and pristine country environment, combined with the therapeutic qualities of the mineral hot springs, were significant adjuncts to his record-breaking success rate. The program included group and individual psychotherapy, yoga, called stretching, meditation, called mind clearing, aerobic exercise, nutrition training, and each patient attended a 1-week residential at Wilbur Hot Springs. In the media, Dr. Miller's innovative approaches to healing have been the subject of national television news reports, including segments of the news programs of Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, David Brinkley, and Phil Donahue. Print media, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News, and World Report. 2 film documentaries, and the books Gestalting Addiction and Psychedelic Medicine. Mind, Body, Health, and Politics radio program is what he co-hosts. Dr. Miller has hosted a weekly radio program, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, originally on National Public Radio affiliate in Mendocino County. Known for its wide-ranging discussions on health and the interface between health and politics, the broadcast features guest interviews with leaders in many fields, ranging from politician Governor Jerry Brown to best-selling author Michael Pollan. Michael is a great author. And we're just going to jump right into a discussion with Dr. Miller. And everyone that has joined, please save your questions and just pop those in the chat as they come up, as you're getting inspired by the conversation we're having. And then we're going to open it up to 15 minutes of Q&A, sometimes 20, sometimes 30, just depending on how long y'all want to hang out. And thank you again for taking time out of your day to learn more about psychedelics and medicine. So Dr. Miller, just going right at it. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you and see all those wonderful books behind you. Nice backdrop. So why did you choose psychology so many years ago? We're just going to get right into it.
Well, as an undergraduate, I started out in philosophy, which I loved. And my areas in philosophy were ethics and aesthetics, which I still have interest in. But I also had a deep interest in people and the practical aspects of philosophy and action, which to a certain extent is psychology. And so I moved from philosophy into psychology early on. I started out as a researcher with a famous researcher called Dr. Raymond B. Cattell. And then I went into clinical work, and I've been charmed, fascinated, excited, enthused about clinical work ever since. I think being a clinical psychologist is a great profession, because for those of us who are curious, we get to be as curious as we want. For those of us who like deep conversation, we get to ask the deepest questions, and we get to be the nosiest people around, because we're covered by license to keep secrets. We're one of the only 2 professions, actually, in the whole United States which is trained on how to keep secrets. Psychologists and licensed psychologists and priests. So
I was going to say the CIA, but
no, they don't keep secrets.
Yeah, exactly. That was just kind of a joke. Thank you for that. In your interview with Dr. Whitaker, you speak to some of the really barbaric treatments that mental health inflicted on its patients. What conclusions did you draw from that, and how did that shape your current practice?
Well, am I correct in assuming you're talking about Robert Whitaker?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Well, Robert Whitaker brought us this wonderful book called Anatomy of an Epidemic. And he's a world-class journalist and does really great work. And what he discovered was that the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, known out on the street as SSRIs, which are supposed to regulate unregulated neurotransmitters of people called mentally ill, instead of regulating their unregulated neurotransmitters, what they actually do is upset their neurotransmitters, because what Whitaker brought to us is information that those people who are referred to as mentally ill really do not have different neurotransmitter function or regulation than, quote, the rest of us. That is a mistake. And so when you give them these SSRIs, what you are doing is disrupting their neurotransmitters. And if some of them get some value from it, no question, but many of them get more disrupted, then to throw salt in their emotional wounds, when they try to get off these SSRIs, which most people do, because very few people want to sign on for a medicine for the rest of their lives. First of all, it's difficult just keeping up with it. And second of all, people just want to see what it's like without a medicine. I mean, all my patients who've been on medicines at one time or another chuck their medicines and want to see what it's like without it. Some of them say it's like getting rid of a straitjacket. So when people get off the SSRIs, Whitaker tells us, they then start to get symptoms, and they think it's their symptoms coming back, and they better get back on the SSRIs. But what Whitaker tells us is that's not really what's going on. What's really going on is they're going through withdrawal of getting off the SSRIs, and that's what these terrible feelings are about. And they need more time to clean themselves of the SSRIs. So this was a very important book, and for the public to know about. And it connects with another book, Brian, which is by Dr. Julie Holland, who's a psychiatrist in Manhattan. And Julie Holland has written several books, but the one I'm referring to now is called Moody Bitches. And what Julie talks about is how women's hormonal structure is disrupted by medicines that they take, but there is a particular interaction between birth control medicine and SSRIs, which really throws their neurotransmitters into chaos, throws their hormonal system into chaos. And so their emotions become very labile, and they get named, oh, look what a moody bitch she is. And that's the title of the book, Moody Bitches. But what Dr. Julie Holland is telling us, it's the interaction between the birth control medicine and the SSRIs that are causing this disruption. So these are two important books for our listeners to know about.
Thank you for that. That could probably explain why I was such a moody bitch when I was on Prozac. I took a 10 milligram dose of Prozac for about almost 2 years. And that is what propelled me to start Medicine Box with the vision that the majority of human beings on this planet would replace the contents of their medicine cabinets with a cannabis hemp plant-based supplement or even a psychedelic treatment. And getting off of that 10 milligram dose of Prozac was not an easy process. I was supplementing with cannabis formulations, GABA, 5-HTP, multivitamin, some CBD during the day, and backing off of that dose because my neurotransmitters they were in chaos, as you explained it. That's a very good way to explain it. And also it dulls the human experience. And
Yeah,
that's what I felt like was happening to me while I was on that Prozac, was a complete dulling of my human experience, my emotions, my observable reality, and the things that I was feeling within myself, and then the external things in reality that was coming at me. It was hard to process. So chaos is a great way to explain it.
Yeah, your story reminds me of a story a journalist wrote after Prozac came out, and he talked about how he took it and how he got benefits from it, but then he was very concerned about the fact that he didn't shed a tear at his mother's funeral because he had so few feelings, and he recognized that the Prozac was taking away the human experience from him.
That's it.
I want to add to this, Brian, something important for our listeners, which is that Duke University did a very important study comparing the SSRIs to exercise. So they had one group got Zoloft, one group got Zoloft and exercise aerobic, and one group got exercise only. All right, you got it? One group got Zoloft only, one group got exercise only, and one group got Zoloft and exercise. They did this. It was a great study, and they reviewed it a couple of years later. And what they found was the group that did the best in terms of recovering from depression was the exercise-only group. Now, one might think that the group that would do best would be the group that did C, D, all of the above, right? Exercise plus Zoloft. But that wasn't the case. The group that did best was the exercise-only group, and they found that the Zoloft actually decreased the effect of the aerobic exercise when it was mixed with the aerobics. So that was a very important study by a very real university for everyone to know. Aerobic exercise is unquestionably, for those who are able to do it, is the number one antidote to depression.
That's it. Bring some oxygen into the body to create some serotonin. That's what we all want. Serotonin, the happy mood regulator, and circadian rhythm, and all the other good things that regulate our lifestyles without having to pop a pill for the illusion of instant gratification. So who should take psychedelics and who shouldn't, in your opinion? How about kids?
We're not there yet in terms of the answer to the question of how about kids. When I say we're not there yet, because of the government suppression of university level research, because of the government suppression of the highest levels of the most prominent scientists in the United States, because of suppressing them from doing research over the last 50 plus years, we are just now scratching the surface regard to the efficacy of psychedelic medicines for healing. So it's going to take a long time before we can answer your question about what about psychedelics for kids, because there may be a place for psychedelic for kids, but we don't know that yet. We don't know all the ways in which psychedelics can be used for healing. We're just still scratching the surface on all the ways that marijuana, tetrahydrocannabinol, can be used for healing. Again, it's because we're so far behind the curve with regard to research. But as the research becomes more and more available, we're going to learn more about specific uses of specific psychedelic and mind-altering substances for healing specific illnesses. And at the same time, we'll also learn about their uses for creativity and for education, which comes back to your question about kids. Is there a place for psychedelics in learning? We'll find that out, but it may be, I don't know how many decades in the future to find that out. I certainly could see a day where people in high school are given courses on how to, the rules of the road with regard to the use of these various things. And if for no other reason, then they're going to use them anyway. And better to have rules of the road and know what to do and what to expect that to continue this madness that we're in right now, where we have tens of millions of people doing these various substances, and they have no rules of the road, they have no guides, they have no nothing other than what they see in the movies, and they hopefully read in books and listen to programs like yours.
I hope so. I believe there's the data shows that the largest age group of prescribed pills are children under the age of 8 years old, for suffering from anxiety, depression, ADHD, and big pharma gets these children young. So then what? They're hooked as a customer for life. That's just my honest observation. So I hope psychedelics do make it into the mainstream with mindful use and education and awareness, so we can all start making better choices on how to create our own health and happiness. Now,
by the way, just to validate what you just said, I mean, I've been watching this whole scene for the last 60 years at least, and I totally agree with what you just said, Brian, that whether it's purposeful or not, the pharmaceutical companies would be very happy to have every person in the United States taking a whole pharmacopoeia of their products on a very regular basis. And why is that? Profit.
Profit, exactly. When I was in grade school back in the 80s, I was a classic ADHD kid, right? Right when ADD was becoming this mainstream thing, and all the teachers and doctors wanted to prescribe me Ritalin at the time. And God bless my mother if she's listening. Hopefully she's not listening, because today is my parents' 42nd anniversary, and I hope they're doing something fun. But my mom, back before there was internet, before there was, everyone's a doctor on Google now, she figured out that was probably not the best medication to give a 6, 7, 8-year-old. However, later on in my life, because I didn't learn any other tools at the time, mindfulness practices, or didn't have, yoga in schools or meditation techniques and breath work and all these great things that we have now as humans in the 21st century, I discovered alcohol and cocaine and other substances to, relieve some of the ADHD symptoms in that chaotic internal environment that I created for myself. But gratefully recovered from that. That was just a little side note. But that's what I always like to plant that flag, because Big Pharma likes to target children at a young age and prey on the uneducation and the lack of awareness that other humans might have to try alternative medicine. So you've featured speakers from the psychedelic community for years on your show. And what inspired you to do the series on psychedelic elders? I find that really fascinating.
Well, I've been a member of what's called the drug wars, going back now for almost 50 years. The drug wars are really the government's war, mostly on people of color, with regard to their ingestion of certain substances and arresting them for it. And there have been those of us who have been fighting against that, in part because it's racial discrimination, but in part because it's discrimination against all of us, because many of us do not really believe at a very basic level that the government has a constitutional right to tell individual citizens what we can and cannot ingest in the privacy of our own home, so long as we're not hurting another human being. that what I take into my body is my business, not the government's business, let alone to come into my house and tear me out of my house and bring me to a place called jail for having ingested that, or to tear me out of my car. And we know, I mean, I won't belabor the fact that people of color are being ripped out of their cars at an inordinate level and taken away to these places. So, you know, that just doesn't work for us. And so we banded together and a long time ago and started legally fighting, and there's progress is being made. At the same time, as we speak, people are still being arrested, and terribly so, and their lives are being destroyed for ingesting, basically, in the case of marijuana, for ingesting vegetables, and in the case of psilocybin, for ingesting vegetables. In the case of LSD and MDMA, for ingesting molecules that come out of the laboratory. And you know, going back when I was teaching at the University of Michigan in the late 1960s, Brian, a student there, John Sinclair, was ripped out of school and put into prison for 10 years for owning 2 marijuana cigarettes. So that kind of seeing that really, you know, it enraged me. It enraged me to see this lovely student taken away and his life ruined because he had 2 cigarettes of some substance that comes out of the ground. So I was almost compelled to become part of the movement. So that was part of it. Part of it also is my own personal experience. I grew up in Manhattan, and I was at a party in Greenwich Village, and I was given marijuana while I was in my teens. And by the way, in my teens, I was 16 years old. I was a freshman at the University of Illinois. I was home for a Christmas vacation, and some fellow gave me marijuana, and I enjoyed it. And I recognized quickly that it was rather harmless, but it was interesting. And then I researched it and very quickly found out that it was much safer than alcohol, which was the drug of choice for college students. And then sometime after that, and I can tell you more about that later, I had the opportunity to experience LSD and had a remarkable experience, which changed the course of my life.
We'll definitely be getting into that as we build the anticipation. And so in your experience, Dr. Miller, is there any difference between plant-based psychedelics versus lab-based? And if so, what? You just mentioned LSD, MDMA, psilocybin as a vegetable. So,
you know, we're talking about molecules affecting other molecules. So at that level, there's no difference. The fact that some of them are made, the molecules are being stuck together in a laboratory, and some of the molecules are being stuck together in the ground and growing, doesn't really change the fact that we still have a molecular structure that, when you ingest it, is having an effect on a molecular structure within the body. So in that sense, it's all the same. And I know, I mean, I've been influenced myself to a certain extent into thinking, oh, well, psilocybin must be better for me in some way than LSD, because psilocybin is a mushroom and it grows out of the ground, and LSD is a chemical that is made in the laboratory. I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe it at all. I really believe in what I said before. We're talking about molecules and that are stuck together to form certain organic compounds that have an effect on our neurotransmitters, which are molecular themselves.
Well, LSD is synthesized from a mushroom, isn't it?
No, LSD is not. It's actually synthesized from ergot and some other formulations by Albert Hoffman. Yeah, that's right. But LSD is not made from psilocybin.
So I like that take. That's a great perspective. And hopefully some people might come up with some interesting questions to bring that up later. But I do want to just
Yeah.
keep moving through. And
Okay.
I know a lot of people are probably very interested in your take on microdosing. Where do you stand on microdosing? That's all the rage right now. 100 milligrams of psilocybin or a tenth of a gram. People are, mixing it with niacin and magnesium threonate and other adaptogenic mushrooms like lion's mane, cordyceps, turkey tail, reishi chaga, ashwagandha, things like that. But it's becoming a big trend, and it's nice to see that people are substituting microdosing for drinking alcohol, for example, or doing other substances. So where's your stand on microdosing?
Well, for me, the question is, what do you want to achieve? And so what do you want to take to get there? So if you're looking for a muscle relaxant, you might want marijuana before Klonopin.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're looking for a slight upper, you might want a microdose rather than Ritalin. And why is that? Because we don't have any evidence that LSD is addictive. It may come down the pike, but right now we don't have. And I talked earlier in our program about the lack of research, but there's no evidence that LSD is addictive, and in part because of the fact that we know it uses up the serotonin. And so if you take it on consecutive days, you're going to get less and less of effect whatsoever. So whether you take 10 micrograms every day or 250 micrograms every day, by the second or third day, the effect is wearing off. Whereas that is not true with drugs of addiction, such as cocaine and heroin and OxyContin, where not only does the effect not wear off, you can keep getting the effect, but often you have to take more and more of the substance. That doesn't work with LSD. You can't start with 10 and then 3 days in a row start 100 and then expect that you're going to get the same, you're going to get an effect. So again, I come back to the answer to your question of what is my take on microdosing. It depends on what effect you're looking for, what you're looking for. If you're looking for a mild energizer that you're hardly going to notice, great. It's certainly a lot safer than, I would say this uncategorically, that it's a lot safer than Ritalin. I mean, you referenced earlier in my introduction, my Coke Enders Alcohol and Drug Program. I can tell you that a significant percentage of the over 1,500 patients that I treated in that program had started in their childhood on Ritalin, just as your mother brilliantly protected you from. But they traced their cocaine addiction right back to their use of Ritalin when they were children. They just went from one kind of upper to another. And we know what's going on in this country right now, which is just terrible, which is these middle-class folks in the Midwest of the United States who have been using OxyContin for pain and various other reasons. When they can no longer get their OxyContin because the government has cracked down on it, they're going to heroin and fentanyl. And that's making this epidemic even worse, and it's putting their whole lives at risk. And so you can see how the kids, as they could no longer get Ritalin, or they outgrew it, they moved on to cocaine. I don't think that's something that we have to be concerned about with microdosing, but one can't be 100% sure. It's important to keep watch on everything. Remember, always keep a skeptical eye.
Trust but verify, right?
Trust and verify.
The epidemic that is ravaging our country right now is very, very sad. And even the fentanyl, I've seen cases that fentanyl has been making it into cocaine and ketamine and other white powdered substances. And we all have to be careful. If anyone is a recreational drug user or using it for therapeutic value, please get testing kits. Our friends over at Double Blind Magazine, they make testing kits over there that you can purchase. So speaking of another friend, Daniel McQueen over at Medicinal Mindfulness in Colorado, transpersonal psychologist, and he asserts that cannabis can be seen as a psychedelic. That is his main entheogen of choice. Do you agree with that? Can cannabis be a psychedelic?
Oh, there's no question that that cannabis can be a psychedelic, and anybody who's smoked either a large dose or a small dose of high THC content will tell you that if you take enough THC, you'll go into psychedelic hyperspace. I've done it. Almost everybody I know has done it at one time or another. And the other thing that happens is until we got regulation here in California, when people were making their own brownies, which they've been doing for 50 years, you don't know exactly how much THC is in each brownie unless you're a chemist in the kitchen. And so people have inadvertently overdosed, eaten a whole brownie, and then they experience exactly what we're talking about, which is they go into psychedelic hyperspace. You go out into the cosmos. And when you take that much THC, that's the time you want to get low. You want to lay down in a bed or sit in a chair and close your eyes and breathe and just enjoy the trip. What you do not want to do when you either inadvertently or purposely take a magnificent dose of tetrahydrocannabinol is I don't recommend that you navigate. You certainly don't want to go anywhere near a machinery or any kind of, or get into a vehicle of any kind. But I go further than that and say, if you get into a large dose of THC, that's the time to treat it as if it were LSD or psilocybin. You want to just sit down quietly or lay down and take the ride and learn as much as you can or enjoy as much as you can, or both.
Absolutely. My mentor, the late, great Michael Hollister, he used to live up in Trinidad Bay. And he was the one that was responsible for showing me all the benefits and efficacies of plant medicine, specifically in cannabis. But he would always say it's a forced vacation when you ingest too much THC, and to just accept it, surrender to the experience, and not try to navigate it or change it. That's when things can get a little bit rough, when we're trying to control the experience outwardly instead of just leaning into that forced vacation. And that's happened to me many times, probably more than I'd like to admit, by just eating a random cookie or a brownie on a friend's countertop, and that was the oops, you weren't supposed to eat off that plate. So
there's another emperor's clothes phenomenon going on here, Brian, which I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about. Early anti-marijuana policing was very much racial. It was against Black people. And one of the things that they used in the media to attack Black people and attack marijuana was that Black people were using marijuana to seduce white women and get them in bed, because marijuana is a sexual activator. Well, that sort of died on the vine over time, but what went with it, and which is not discussed very much, is the fact that sexual activity under mild amounts of marijuana is very often greatly enhanced. But that's a topic that hardly anybody wants to talk about, because what's more provocative to talk about than sex or drugs than talking about sex and drugs? And so you don't hear about it very much. But the fact of the matter is, almost anyone who's used marijuana over a period of time and who's used it during sexual activity will acknowledge that it most often enhances and it rarely detracts from sexual activity. So, but that's it's something that's sort of kept, sub rosa. It's not described very much. You know that as well as I.
Exactly. So now that
the reason for that, by the way, is that our country is outstandingly hypocritical about sexual activity. we've, really,
Taboo.
we've taken something that everybody, or almost, that's how we get here to begin with, through the sexual act. It's something that almost every person has a drive to get involved in sexual activity. It's used in advertising worldwide constantly. And yet at the same time, we have laws against it. We have restrictions on it. We have taboos on it. It's like the number one piece of hypocrisy in the country.
Absolutely. That's a whole other
Program.
Webcast and program, and probably get way more experts than myself to interview on that topic. But so we're seeing a lot of businesses and startups enter into the psychedelic space, and people that weren't involved when you started talking about psychedelics. And what should we be demanding from them, and how do we prevent this from turning into another one of Big Pharma's toys?
Brian, that's a great question. May I ask you to hold the question for a minute, because I just realized I didn't answer your last question about my current book, Confessions of Psychedelic Elders. You asked me why I'm doing that book, and I got so long-winded, which I tend to do, that I didn't really get to the answer. And
well, so I'm glad you traveled back in time, Dr. Miller.
Yeah. So if I may, I'd like to answer that.
Sure thing.
I'm writing this book, Confessions of Psychedelic Elders, because I want the public to know that prominent people, distinguished people, accomplished people, patriotic people, good fathers and mothers, established scientists, established regular people, have been doing psychedelics quietly, secretly, for decades, without getting in trouble, without being institutionalized, without losing their jobs, without doing any damage. In fact, the opposite is true. That what the public will find out when they read this book is that psychedelic medicines have enhanced the lives of all of these prominent people. And I want the public to know that. And that's the reason for that book, Confessions of Psychedelic Elders, which I'm hoping, by the way, will be a big hit and will lead to a series of books about confessions of people in many areas of endeavor, to show the country what's really been going on in secret, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to your question. Now to your question about the renaissance that's going on. Well, it's a great question, and a lot of us are concerned about it, Brian, because there are those of us who very strongly feel that all information needs to be outsourced, that all information needs to be available to all people, and that these medicines should be, when they're proven and when they're made legal, should be available to all people, not just the very wealthy who can afford them, or the upper who can afford them, which is the way they could possibly go if certain influences in this country get control. So you're raising an extremely important opinion. And of course, important question, I beg your pardon. And it's going to be a rough go, Brian, because in order to do the research that's necessary, huge amounts of money are needed. And the money comes from people who are very often mostly motivated by making more money, not necessarily by making the products available to the public. So we're gonna have a squeeze there. And that's what we have. One of the fortunate things, Brian, is that psilocybin can be grown by anybody. So the public will not be dependent on pharmaceutical companies for psilocybin when it becomes legalized. You can grow it in any anybody can grow it in their apartment, in the kitchen. So that's on the positive side of the greed motive.
Do DIY, do it yourself. I mean, same with the legal cannabis industry in California, that every parcel property can legally grow up to 6 plants. And I find that fascinating. I think that's great. I think everybody in California should learn how to grow their 6 plants, whether they are in an urban area or a rural area. Get out there and get in the earth and your hands in the soil, and learn how to nurture a plant that's going to provide you with the medicine that you need. So I like your perspective on that. So are there any business entities, media outlets in the field, in the psychedelic renaissance field right now, that you think are doing it right and doing it with integrity?
There are startups that are happening. I'm not going to mention them by name. Some of them are already on the stock market. I can't speak for what direction they're going to go, Brian. It's too early to tell. I think the most important answer that I could give is the one I gave you, which is there's a saving grace in the fact that psilocybin can be grown in the home, and there's a saving grace in the fact that people can grow marijuana in their backyards if they're lucky enough and privileged enough to have a backyard. We have to remember that hundreds of millions of people are still living in what we call apartments that don't have any greenery around them whatsoever, and they're basically living in cement, so they don't have that option, and those people have to buy products.
We could turn all the rooftops and all the living walls into grow space. Just personally, over at Medicine Box, we really love the work that Madison Margolin is doing with Double Blind, and then also Justin Hampton on our team is a psychedelic journalist for Lucid News. That's one of my favorite publications. So if anyone's listening, check out Double Blind and Lucid News. Nice little friendly plug there. So if someone is just starting out with psychedelics, no experience, in how should they structure their experience, and what would be your recommendations? I think there's probably some set and setting technique in there and that we could speak about.
Well, to begin with, there are 3 books that I recommend that are essential reading if you want to get involved with these psychedelic substances. And the 3 books, one of them is Dr. Jim Fadiman's book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, because that's a recipe book. And the second book would be Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, because that's a book of a journalist's personal experiences with psychedelics. And the third book would be my book, Psychedelic Medicine, which is a book of the scientists who have had the courage and the stick-to-itiveness to be able to do research in these psychedelics. And my book brings you their honest evaluations and opinions on the various psychedelics. So with those 3 books, you have personal, the scientific, and the recipe. So you've got a great foundation. Then in terms of the experience itself, there are some basics that I think all of us agree to who are in this profession that are not controversial. You mentioned set and setting. The setting is where you take the medicine. And we recommend that you take the medicine in a super safe place and a super quiet place. So in nature or on a beach or in your home, but if you do it in your home, you want to turn off all the telephones. You want to make sure that everything is quiet, because what you don't want during, especially in your early psychedelic experiences, is you don't want intrusions, and you certainly don't want industrial noise coming at you of any kind, motors and engines and things like that.
The machine world.
You don't want the machine world. You want it absolutely quiet, because you want to be able to go inside and have an adventure of examining the interior landscape. What I call, it's sort of like being on a voyage into oneself. And the set, you said set and setting. The set is your mental set going into the experience. You want to have an intention that you can say out loud, what it is you're doing, what it is you're looking for. And you certainly want to be at least in some semblance of feeling okay, meaning you don't want to be feeling not okay and hoping. That's not the time to start. You want to be more calm before you begin. And the last thing of the three basics, set, setting, and a guide or a sitter. You want someone who's going to cover the bases so that you can be totally inside, or if you want to be outside listening to music.
Oh no.
Of normal life tasks while you're under the influence, a strong influence of a strong psychedelic, particularly in the beginning. You down the road a bit, maybe you're going to get good enough that you can navigate, but not in the beginning. So the guide will take care of external reality, number one. And number two, the guide, who's an experienced person, and that's what you want, will be able to take what's called a bad trip and turn it into the best trip. Because from my perspective, a bad trip is the best trip for one reason. A bad trip allows us to confront our demons. And if we can confront our demons safely, because the guide is guiding us to go deeper into them rather than run away from them, to explore them rather than be afraid of them, we can go into our demons, we can look at them, we can heal them, we can master them, and we can come out of the experience with the confidence of having conquered them, so they are no longer lurking in our psyche. And from that perspective, these things that may have been lurking there for months or years are have been a Damocles sword. We've had to keep them walled off because I don't want to look in that box because there's terrible stuff in there. But if we look at it under the influence of this psychedelic medicine, we can confront it gently and heal it, surround it with golden light and love, gain a greater understanding, and then come away with the confidence of having eliminated a fear in our lives. And the more we eliminate fear in our lives, the better we feel.
The more we open up to love. I thank you for that explanation. And I like what one of your old colleagues, Dr. Ralph Metzger, says about that experience is we can't change the past actually, but we can change it virtually. And that's what you just spoke about, is being able to go deeper and deeper and confront these demons in our shadows and become friends with them and accept them and wrap them up in humility and send it off with compassion. And also wanted to bring out a quote here. I pulled out a book, The Ecology of Consciousness by Dr. Ralph Metzger, and he points out here that psychedelic or entheogenic substances by themselves do not produce healing, therapeutic, or mystical experience. It is not a question of pharmacology or drug effects. Everything depends on set and setting, on intention. And awareness tools, like any tools, can be misused and abused. But given a spiritual orientation and intention, they can be used to amplify, catalyze, and facilitate healing, psychotherapeutic, creative, and meditative processes. So just wanted to reinforce what you just spoke about, because there's a lot of people out there that do want to engage in these therapeutic experiences and might have a little bit of fear around them, but educate yourselves and just be sure to have the three things that Dr. Miller just spoke about. And
but Brian, let let me underline something you're saying there,
Yeah.
please, because it's quite important, this issue of the guide. Because we've talked a little in the program about the greed motive. And what we're seeing, both in South America and in the United States, is people are jumping into offering psychedelic experiences to others as a way of making money.
Yeah.
And this is really a time, if there ever was a time, for caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. You really, if you're thinking of joining into one of these psychedelic circles, you want to do due diligence. You really want to examine who the people are who are leading this and find out if they really do, in fact, have the chops, the experience to guide you, or are they looking for a way to make a quick buck? And I'm concerned very much about these so-called psychedelic tourist excursions, where people going to South America into the jungle and somebody that they don't know is giving them ayahuasca. I think that's a very tricky and risky thing to do. I really want to know who it is that's guiding me when I go on a psychedelic experience. I want to know a lot because, you know, my psyche is on the line. And
Exactly.
Yeah, as well as my treasure. So that's a word for everybody to know. Really look into who it is and see if you're just getting involved in, you know, some kind of quick scam, or not even a quick scam. They might have righteous, you know, real reasons, but not really have the experience to deal with what may come up. And what you want when you go into something this big, a psychedelic experience with a solid dose of LSD or psilocybin, is going to be a big experience in your life. I mean, how many of the people of these elders that I've interviewed, they remember their very first experience brilliantly as if it happened yesterday. And so it's a word to the wise, you know.
Thank you for that. That's a whole other topic of conversation that I like to explore with people, you know, doing some of my own psychedelic experiences and doing the due diligence to ensure that the folks that are facilitating it have the right intentions, they have the experience, and also the medicine is coming from a place of integrity, that can be traced back to certain medicine carriers, and it's going towards the Native American church or indigenous cultures in South America. And I call that the Shaman Express. It's very romanticized of being a facilitator or a psychedelic sitter or a guide without having the profound experience that maybe some of the psychedelic elders that are in your organization do. And I've sat with, you know, peyote facilitators that are still students from the elders after 12 years, and they're very humble about where they're at 12 years later, holding ceremony, but they're not quite ready yet. I think the more humility that you can find with the guide and the people that are serving the medicine, the better experience you're going to have with your psyche. And thank you for explaining that your psyche is on the line. And I do have one more question before we open it up to Q&A from the audience. And thank you to the audience for hanging out so patiently. There's also a move to create non-psychedelic derivatives of these compounds. Tabernathalog, which is the non-psychoactive derivative of ibogaine, created at UC Irvine. What place do they have with this medicine, and what can the trip do that a non-psychedelic drug can't?
If and only if these non-psychedelics can accomplish the same kind of healing that a psychedelic can, then they will be much more palatable to a larger percentage of the public, because there are still, we don't know what percentage of the public that are really frightened about the possibility of ingesting a psychedelic medicine. And for the group of tens of millions of people who have smoked marijuana in this country and realize that it's not harmful, there are more tens of millions of people in this country who are frightened of it. They're frightened of it. And the basis of the fear in both cases is a loss of control.
Yep.
People are afraid of losing control, and they think that if they lose control, they may never get it back again. So they could be in a permanent state of somewhere else, which is very frightening. And so the medicines that you're talking about that might possibly achieve the healing without going into various forms of a psychedelic consciousness could be a very appealing to a lot of people, and particularly if they're legitimate medicines. One of the things that enrages me the most, and it has for my entire career, about the government's suppression, is that it makes people resort to street medicine in order to get their medicines that they want to experiment with. They have to buy LSD or MDMA or even psilocybin on the street. And when you do that, you can't be sure of what you're getting. And that's horrific. That is horrific. That is a crime against humanity for normal, regular, good citizens to buy something and not know what it is they're buying that they're going to put into their body. And the government is responsible for that.
Right. Well, as the Dalai Lama says, relax. Nothing is in control. and isn't the full psychedelic, speaking for myself and probably many others, that the actual psychedelic experience of surrendering into it, losing control, dissolving the ego that thinks it's in control, isn't that where the real therapeutic value is? The healing, the disintegration of the mind, or the unraveling of the mind, and these shadows and past experiences and resentments and traumas that we've held on to so tightly, and we walk through and carry that with us. The psychedelic experience is there to shatter it open, right, and break it down, like you said, and confront it and become friends with it. I like that. Like some of the things I've worked on, anger and some other trauma work, is like I became friends with that fiery Sicilian blood that I have running through me from the East Coast. Like became friends with it. And once I was able to do that, I came into acceptance with it. And when the greater acceptance that we have, we don't really need to be in control of anything. We just accept life on life's terms and find peace and serenity through people, places, and things. And absolutely nothing happens in this universe by mistake. So that's my 2 cents on having the actual profound psychedelic experience.
That beautifully said, Brian. The only thing I would change in everything you said was I don't think that psychedelic medicines shatter the ego. I think it dissolves the ego. It dissolves the ego. And what it does is by dissolving the borders, it brings us all closer together. Mm-hmm. It was through my very first psychedelic experience that I came to recognize that every one of us on this planet is connected, mm-hmm. and that we're all part of each other.
And we're just the microcosms of a macrocosmic universe.
Exactly.
All interconnected.
All interconnected, right. Like the mushrooms.
So we have some questions. And from Sherry Stifler. I hope I got that right. What are the benefits of microdosing? How or where can people start this microdosing regime for depression and anxiety? I think we touched on that. I did drop the books, Dr. James Fadiman's Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, and Dr. Dennis Miller's Psychedelic Medicine. Is there anything else you want to add on microdosing? We did touch on that a lot.
I think we covered it. If Sherry has another question, please, type it in or come unmute and tell us. Be happy to handle it.
Sure. Thank you. From Leonardo Carpin. When I saw Leonardo Carpin's name come up across my screen, I was like, holy shit, Leonardo DiCaprio's on. Leonardo, just as badass as Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm sure. What are, in your opinion, the important steps to follow to have a positive psychedelic trip? In other words, what makes a trip a bad one? We did talk about that too. See, we're all connected. Dr. Miller has been in all y'all's psyche. How important is the role of a shamanic experience, especially if it's the first one? No need to apologize about your English. It is great. Thank you, Leonardo.
The issue isn't whether the person calls themselves a shaman or a doctor or a guide or a coach. The issue is the amount of experience they bring to the table. What a license or a certificate offers the public is a way of knowing that the person, it offers the person a way of knowing that the person has had a certain amount of supervised experience. So that's what you get when you hire a doctor, or a person with a master's level. It tells you how much experience they've had, but it doesn't tell you how much more experience they've had after they got their university training. That's something you have to ask about. If you've done like, for example, I'm having a medical procedure soon. So, and it's a serious one. So I said to the doctor, how many of these have you done? He said, I've done over 1,000. I said, that's good enough for me. I don't need to know anymore unless your success rate is terrible. You could do 1,000 and screwed up 900 of them. You have to know how, not just the number, but how well it went. And so the important thing here with regard to whether it's a shaman, a doctor, a coach, a guide, is that you can have an honest conversation with the person prior to the experience, and you can ask the toughest questions that you want to ask in the nicest way possible to find out if you're comfortable with the person. Consumer Reports did a great piece of research on the effect of psychotherapy. And what they found out was it's not the particular tools or technique that the therapist uses that contributes to the success. What contributes to the success mostly is the alliance between the person or patient and the person doing the healing. If there's a positive alliance, you're going to get a more positive result. And so what I say to you, and I say to all our listeners, is ask the good questions beforehand, and then you'll know if you're comfortable in the environment. And if you're not certain of what questions to ask, bring an advocate and have your advocate who's more experienced ask the tough questions. Because what I say to my patients and people and clients is, you can ask me anything you want, professionally or personally, because I'm going to be doing the same with you.
Exactly. You're going to be holding those secrets close, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, licensed to hold secrets. And speaking of that, doing that yourself, here's a back-to-back question from the team over at Medicine Box. Should these substances become legal, could you see yourself using them with patients, or is that a secret that you like to keep?
No, I believe in radical transparency, no secrets. I think the reason we have secrets is to have power over other people with the secret that we're keeping. And the way to get a more egalitarian world is to get rid of all the secrets. So would I use them? I can tell you that some of these medicines were used on me while they were still legal, because I'm old enough to have been eligible to have them used on me before they were made illegal. And would I, and the answer to your question of would I be allowed under if I were allowed under my license to use them, would I? Absolutely, yes. MDMA is the most effective medicine for couples work that I believe is anywhere on the planet. MDMA, known on the street as ecstasy, but when you take ecstasy, as I said before, you don't have any idea what you're getting. But when you get laboratory MDMA, you're getting a medicine that really does drop defenses, which really does put us in touch with the love in our hearts, which really does open us up to listening to our partner in a different way. MDMA is a very powerful tool for personal growth, and particularly for couples work.
Great. So we see the same things on MDMA, but we just feel it differently with empathy, compassion, love. I thank you for that. Victoria, thank you for the question. How do you see the future of taking psychedelic medicine? What would you wish for to change and how? And then, by the way, I love to take MDMA with my boyfriend. That's from Victoria. Thank you, Victoria.
Well, there's a struggle that's going on the planet. And it's a struggle between those who believe that authoritarian control is the way, and those who believe an egalitarian system is the way. There are those who believe that the present game of capitalistic monopoly is the way, which ends up with the 1% or a small percent on top and everybody else following. And there's a group that believe that a more level playing field is the way. And 10,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, 1% ran the entire country and 99% were slaves. Some of us believe that we really haven't changed very much since then, except the slaves are no longer living on the plantation. And so there is this tension going on between the two groups. And that's the answer to your question with regard to the use of psychedelics. If the authoritarian group maintains and takes over more control, there'll be less use of psychedelics because they'll be made more and more illegal, because psychedelics open people up to other paradigms of living, that this isn't the only way and this isn't the only reality, and this way I'm living my life isn't the only way to live my life. And so psychedelics open people up to options, and authoritarian control does not want the public to have options. It wants everybody moving pretty much in lockstep in the direction that the authoritarian control wants. And so it's this tension that's going to be the answer to your question, Brian. If the more egalitarian approach succeeds, then we're going to see widespread use of psychedelics for creativity, for personal growth, for vocational adeptness, and more as the research expands. But if the other group takes over, you're going to see more and more restrictions. There's going to be a backlash.
It's makes me think of something Madison Margolin at Double Blind says, is that the mainstream shouldn't have to adapt to the psychedelic renaissance or microdosing lifestyle or culture. It's the other way around, that we need to adapt the microdosing use of psychedelics back upstream into the mainstream, so we can actually come back into more of a collective society and a unified one. However, I think there is something to say about the fear that maybe that 1% has, that the more people that are expanding their minds, their awareness, their intelligence, their creativity, they're healing themselves, that they may be in trouble. That is where it might shatter the 1%. So just a little bit of a funny pun there. But my question before we leave here, one is always for deep exploration. And I got sober through the 12-step program starting in 2012. I'm coming up on 9 years here, September 9th. It wasn't until, cocaine and alcohol were my drugs of choice. So thank you for having this conversation with me today, because it really touches my heart from a deep and intrinsic place, Dr. Miller. And through the 12-step program, I didn't start using, plant-based medicines or psychedelics, probably not until 2, 3, 4 years in, and realized that it was something that I could add to the greater toolbox while using the 12-step recovery program as a tool, not the only tool that I have. But Bill W., the founder of the 12-step program, took LSD in 1957 in a clinical setting. I believe Aldous Huxley was there and some of the other psychedelic elders, because Bill W. was so passionate about other people's sobriety. He really wanted people to have that spiritual experience, that spiritual awakening that he got without the use of psychedelics. I believe he was laying down in his hospital bed, and the wind blew the curtain through the window, and it was white curtain, and he just had this experience. And he really wanted everyone else in that 12-step program that started in 1937 to have that spiritual awakening. He thought LSD was going to be the tool to get people to awaken themselves. However, a lot of people during that stage of time, right, and 57 is probably when the dampers started to get put on the research, said, Bill, that's a little too radical. But I think that's something worth talking about. Do you know anything about that period of time and how maybe we went off onto a different course, and now we're kind of coming back onto course with recovery, with addiction, and the chaotic relationship of drugs and alcohol that Americans have?
I'm very familiar with that period of time, and as far as I know, everything you said is accurate, Brian, about him, Bill, and his experiences. My understanding is that he opted away from LSD for political reasons, that it was simply too far out, and he didn't want to hurt the AA program. And I can tell you that there's another reason that there's a hesitation with regard to chemically dependent people. As you know, I have a great deal of experience. It's certainly been one of my major specialties in my career. And the other hesitance is as follows. There are a lot of things that go along with chemical dependence, particularly with cocaine and alcohol. And of those things that go along with it are major changes in the person's lifestyle. And so, like the classic thing of people who use cocaine become liars and become cheats and so on and stuff like that. So, but there are all kinds of things, hiding and being secretive and doing things that are damaging to your personality and that go along with the addiction. In fact, those things go along with all kinds of, I don't even call them addiction anymore. I call them impulse control disorders. We lose control of our impulses, and it can be food, it could be gambling, it could be cocaine, it could be alcohol, but we don't control the impulse. We do something so much that it becomes injurious to our health, our business, our family. And there would be a great deal of benefit to using the insights from psychedelics to conquering these impulse control disorders. Yes. My hesitance is that, as McLuhan taught us, the medium is the message. And so if the person comes away from the experience of using a psychedelic to either temporarily or who knows how long, come off their impulse control disorder of choice, part of their takeaway is going to be, I used a drug to get off a drug. And that's what I have a hesitance about, because I want the people who I work with who are successful to come away feeling I use myself to get off this particular problem. I use myself to conquer this impulse control. And if I use myself to conquer this kind of impulse control disorder that's called cocaine addiction or alcohol addiction or OxyContin addiction, if I use myself to do that, I can use myself to conquer other things and do well in other things in my life. But if I come away with the feeling that I used a drug to do it, then I'm sort of sharing the credit. And I'm not so sure I want to have folks, including myself, share that credit. I'm uncertain. I'm not against it, but I've got questions, and I'm openly sharing the questions with you.
Thank you. I like that we can overcome these impulse disorders and erratic behaviors with ourselves. Ourselves are the same person that got into it in the first place, so we should be able to get out of it. And I'm coming up on the 9 years of sobriety, but I started drinking and using at 14 years old, so 14 to 32. I'm still walking out of the woods. I went deep into the woods for 18 years, and I've walked backwards 9 years, and I probably have another 9 years plus. It's a never-ending journey, and I'm grateful to be able to be in that journey one day at a time, as we say in recovery, and using the tools in that program and other tools. I think of it all as tools.
That's right.
And I don't like to depend on one more than the other. And 90% of my toolbox is me. The other 10%, some of these plant medicines and supplements are the amplifications of the 90%. So I'm getting there, and it would be nice, to go up to 100%. And I've used all the tools to get me to my whole true self, and I put all the pieces back together.
Brian, 90-10 is good enough. Even 80-20 is good enough. I love the way you put it. You're using yourself and you use the medicines as a tool. I think the same way. You've got tools in your toolbox. You're using them. They're not using you. And everything you've done, you've done in your 9 years of recovery has just strengthened you as a person, both in terms of the recovery, but in terms of everything else you're doing in your life. So I say bravo to you. Bravo.
Thank you. Bravo back to you. And that's all the time we have. And this discussion will be emailed back out to everyone that gave us your email. So stay tuned for that from a email from Medicine Box. We'll have the full length audio. We'll have some show notes, some spliced up audiograms of the really potent pieces that Dr. Miller and I spoke about. And again, from myself in behalf of Medicine Box, Dr. Richard Miller, super grateful to have you on today. And the guests, thank you all for hanging out. These conversations could just go on for hours, and I do like to stretch it a little bit over the 60-minute marker to get all your questions in. So thank you for the questions. And I have a feeling this won't be the first or last time that we speak, Dr. Miller. And as we say in recovery, are there any burning desires from you or anyone in the audience before we let everyone go and enjoy this beautiful August day? Thank you. Greetings from Berlin. We have people tuning in from Berlin. That's amazing. All right. Without further ado, looks like that's a wrap. That's a journey. Thanks for being a good facilitator, a good guide through conversation. And anyone also too, we will have a drawing for one cab products. That's the Medicine Box suite of botanical and cannabinoid based products that we have for sleep, gut health, and overall vitality. And that's over $100 prize. And Leonardo Carpin, thank you very much. Say hi to Leonardo DiCaprio for us if you know him. And Dr. Richard, thanks again.